The U.S. military just pulled off something that sounds impossible. They sank an entire class of warships in less than 24 hours, while simultaneously hitting over 500 targets across a country the size of Alaska. This wasn't a video game. This was real combat, and it happened because Iran made a catastrophic miscalculation about leverage. March 11th started like any other day in the Strait of Hormuz. Commercial ships were moving through one of the world's most critical waterways, carrying the oil that keeps economies running. Then the attacks began. 3 vessels hit within hours. The Thai-registered Mayuri Nuri took 2 projectiles and erupted in flames 11 nautical miles north of Oman. 20 crew members scrambled into lifeboats as their ship became an inferno. 3 stayed behind, a skeleton crew hoping to save what they could. But Iran wasn't finished. The Japanese container ship One Majesty got struck next, 45 kilometers northwest of Ras Al Khaimah. Minor damage, waterline intact, but the message was clear. Then came the Star Gwyneth, a Marshall Islands flagged bulk carrier, hit 50 kilometers northwest of Dubai while sitting at anchor. Hull damage, no injuries. Just another warning shot in Iran's campaign to weaponize geography. 11 previous attacks had already occurred since this war began. Iran's strategy wasn't subtle. Control the Strait of Hormuz, control 20% of the world's seaborne oil, force prices to $200 per barrel, make the economic pain so severe that America and Israel would have to negotiate. It's the only card Iran has left to play, and they were betting everything on it. Here's what makes the Strait of Hormuz so dangerous. At its narrowest point, it's only 21 miles wide. Sounds spacious until you realize that tanker traffic doesn't spread across the entire waterway. Shipping lanes, one inbound and one outbound, are each about 2 miles wide. A 2-mile buffer zone separates them. That's 6 miles of navigable water that Iran's fast boats can patrol and its drones can strike. 6 miles standing between global commerce and chaos. The Iranian regime's spokesperson practically announced their intentions. Get ready for oil to be $200 a barrel, because the oil price depends on regional security, which you have destabilized. Oil had already spiked to $120 before settling around $90. The threat was working, insurance rates were climbing, ship owners were calculating alternative routes, some were avoiding the strait entirely. This is what leverage looks like when you have nothing else. Iran's nuclear program wasn't mature enough to threaten anyone. Their conventional military was being systematically dismantled. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had been taking a non-stop pounding from American airstrikes, so they turned to asymmetric warfare, targeting civilian vessels to force a political outcome. It was payback, sure, but it was also desperation dressed up as strategy. 2 scenarios played out in Iran's planning. Best case, the attacks would force peace negotiations. America couldn't sustain the political pressure of watching a critical waterway shut down, watching oil prices spiral, watching the global economy take hits. Worst case, the chaos continues long enough to achieve the same economic leverage through a different path. Commercial ships would simply stop using the strait. Longer routes, higher costs, supply chain disruptions. Either way, Iran wins some breathing room. Except they forgot who they were dealing with. President Trump had issued a warning on March 10th via Truth Social. If Iran placed mines in the Hormuz Strait, they needed to remove them immediately. Not eventually. Not after negotiations. Immediately. The message was direct. If for any reason mines were placed and they are not removed forthwith, the military consequences to Iran will be at a level never seen before. He even dangled an incentive. Pull back, stop the attacks, and it would be a giant step in the right direction. Iran attacked anyway. 13 minutes later, Trump announced the response. I am pleased to report that within the last few hours we have hit and completely destroyed 10 inactive mine-laying boats and /or ships, with more to follow. Inactive vessels that were likely about to become very active, gone. Erased from the naval order of battle before they could deploy a single mine. The revenge didn't stop there. By the time the smoke cleared on March 11th, 16 mine-laying vessels had been destroyed. Several other naval vessels joined them at the bottom. But the most devastating blow came in the form of a complete wipeout. The last 4 Shahid Soleimani-class corvettes in Iran's fleet were eliminated in coordinated strikes. An entire class of warships gone, not damaged, not disabled, sunk. U.S. Central Command released footage showing strike after strike hitting different locations across Iran. The attacks came on an almost hourly basis, unpredictable in timing and direction. The strategy was working exactly as intended. Unpredictable, dynamic, decisive. Iran had no answers because the bulk of their navy couldn't defend against America's superior firepower. Air defenses were overwhelmed. Command and control was fractured. The retaliation was so swift and comprehensive that Iran's regime was left reeling. But here's what nobody saw coming. The numbers that started rolling in after the dust settled revealed something extraordinary about the scale of American military operations. Over 5,500 targets struck since Operation Epic Fury began in late February. More than 60 of those targets were Iranian warships. Think about what that actually means. 5,500 targets doesn't mean 5,500 bombs. The munitions count goes far higher, especially against hardened infrastructure. Underground bunkers don't collapse from a single strike. You hit them repeatedly, systematically, until the reinforced concrete gives way and the facility becomes useless. Each target might absorb 3, 5, 10 precision munitions depending on construction and strategic value. The math gets staggering quickly. Averaging 500 targets per day means the United States was conducting one of the most intensive aerial campaigns in modern history. Not since the opening days of Desert Storm had American forces sustained this tempo of precision strikes. And unlike Desert Storm, this campaign was hitting a country with layered air defenses, underground facilities, and decades of preparation for exactly this scenario. Preston Stewart raised the sustainability question that military analysts worldwide were asking. Can you maintain 500 strikes daily using only standoff munitions? Tomahawks, ATACMS, long-range cruise missiles. America's stockpiles are deep, but they're not infinite. You don't have enough to sustain this pace indefinitely without switching tactics. The shift was already happening. Guided bombs were taking over from cruise missiles as the primary munition of choice. Cheaper, plentiful, effective when you have air superiority, which America absolutely had. Iranian air defenses were being systematically dismantled, creating safe corridors for bombers and strike fighters to operate with near impunity. This matters because guided bombs change the sustainability equation entirely. Production capacity for JDAMs and similar munitions far exceeds cruise missile manufacturing. You can keep this pressure going for months if needed. grinding down every military asset Iran has until their regime calculates that continued resistance costs more than capitulation. But Iran wasn't capitulating. Not yet. Because they still held one card that all the airstrikes in the world couldn't fully neutralize: fast attack boats. These aren't the mine layers America just sent to the bottom. These are small, rapid vessels that can zip toward a target, launch drones or rockets, then disappear before anyone responds. Some aren't even crewed. Iran developed remote-controlled boats packed with explosives, essentially seaborne kamikaze drones similar to what Ukraine used against Russia's Black Sea Fleet. The March 11th attacks demonstrated this threat wasn't theoretical. Despite America's overwhelming retaliation, despite losing 16 mine layers and an entire corvette class, Iran managed to strike 2 more commercial vessels on March 12th. The Saifsieh Vishnu and the Zephyrosware, both flying Marshall Islands flags, were hit around 1:30 in the morning local time off Iraq's coast. Unknown projectiles again. Both ships burst into flames, 38 crew members rescued, 1 person died. The Strait of Hormuz remained effectively closed to commercial shipping at anything approaching normal volume. Vessel owners weren't risking their ships and crews no matter how many Iranian warships America sank. The economic leverage Iran sought was materializing through sheer fear, even as their military capability degraded by the hour. 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Sounds spacious until you understand how maritime traffic actually works. Ships don't spread across the entire waterway. Traffic flows through designated shipping lanes, 1 inbound and 1 outbound, each roughly 2 miles wide with a 2-mile buffer between them. 6 miles of navigable space that Iran's remaining assets could patrol and strike. This is asymmetric warfare at its essence. America can sink every major surface vessel Iran possesses, but dozens of fast boats operating from hidden coastal positions present a completely different challenge. You can't bomb every possible launch site. You can't maintain constant surveillance over every mile of coastline. And you definitely can't guarantee that a determined attacker won't slip through and land a hit on a slow-moving oil tanker. The solution required a fundamental shift in American strategy. Air superiority over Iran itself was one thing. Securing a maritime choke point against guerrilla-style naval attacks demanded something else entirely. Constant air patrols over the strait. Fighter jets rotating through sorties, maintaining persistent coverage so anything attempting to launch gets intercepted before reaching targets. F-22s, F-18, F-35s, F-16. As many airborne as logistics allowed. The approach had proven effective in limited engagements. Footage emerged of an F-16 destroying Shahed drones over Dubai, demonstrating that air power could intercept these threats when positioned correctly. Expensive, absolutely. American fighters and their munitions cost exponentially more than Iranian drones. But effectiveness matters more than cost efficiency when you're trying to reopen a waterway that carries 20% of global seaborne oil. 17 million barrels transit through this strait daily, accounting for 20 to 30% of worldwide oil consumption. The Gulf region has limited pipeline alternatives. 88% of Persian Gulf oil exports move through Hormuz. Iran understood this dependency intimately, which is why they weren't backing down despite catastrophic military losses. Then France announced something unexpected, an unprecedented naval deployment to the Strait of Hormuz, Red Sea, and Mediterranean. President Emmanuel Macron detailed the force composition. 2 helicopter carriers, 8 frigates, and the Charles de Gaulle, France's flagship aircraft carrier. Suddenly, America wasn't alone in this fight. Allied warships meant escort capability multiplied dramatically. Commercial vessels could transit with naval protection, warships providing electronic warfare coverage and firepower to eliminate threats before they struck. The calculus shifted instantly. Iran's leverage wasn't eliminated, but it was severely degraded. With French naval assets joining American forces, the protection envelope over commercial shipping expanded beyond what either nation could achieve independently. Escort operations became viable at scale. A tanker sailing through the strait with a French frigate on one side and an American destroyer on the other presented a radically different risk profile than sailing alone. The French deployment timeline mattered enormously. Ships don't teleport across oceans. Sailing the Charles de Gaulle battle group from European waters to the Persian Gulf takes weeks. But the announcement itself created immediate strategic pressure on Iran's regime. They now faced a countdown to significantly enhanced Allied naval presence, and their window for leveraging Hormuz control was closing fast. Meanwhile, America's aerial campaign on the Iranian mainland continued its relentless pace. 5,500 targets struck represented an average of roughly 500 per day since Operation Epic Fury began. Maintaining that tempo indefinitely requires addressing a fundamental logistics reality. Standoff munitions like Tomahawk cruise missiles and ATACMS provide safety for launching platforms, keeping aircraft and ships beyond enemy engagement range. But stockpiles aren't infinite. You can't sustain 500 strikes daily forever using only cruise missiles. The solution involves shifting toward guided bombs delivered by aircraft operating within Iranian airspace. More dangerous for pilots, certainly. But America established air superiority early in the campaign, and Iran's integrated air defense network was systematically dismantled during the initial strike waves. Guided bombs are cheaper, more abundant, and equally effective against most target categories. The transition allows sustained pressure without depleting strategic missile stockpiles. This matters because Iran's regime shows no indication of surrender despite catastrophic losses. Every day brings new evidence of their military degradation. Warships sunk, command centers destroyed, air defense systems neutralized, weapons production facilities reduced to rubble. Yet they continue launching attacks through whatever means remain available. Fast boats striking commercial vessels, drones harassing shipping lanes, the asymmetric tactics that defined their strategy from the beginning. Putin watches this unfold with growing concern. Russia's Middle East ambitions depend heavily on Iranian partnership and regional influence. The potential collapse of Iran's regime creates cascading problems for Moscow. Loss of a crucial regional ally, diminished leverage over oil markets, reduced capability to project power beyond Russia's immediate borders. Syria, already a Russian liability, becomes even more complicated without Iranian support. The entire architecture of Russian influence in the region could unravel. But Iran's regime collapsing isn't inevitable despite the immense pressure. Authoritarian governments often prove remarkably resilient when facing external threats. Internal opposition gets suppressed more easily when foreign enemies provide justification for crackdowns. The question becomes whether military degradation happens faster than the regime can adapt and survive. France's naval deployment shifts this equation substantially. If commercial shipping resumes at normal volumes through the Strait of Hormuz, Iran loses its primary remaining leverage. Oil prices stabilize instead of spiking toward $200 per barrel. Global economic pressure for ceasefire negotiations diminishes. America and its allies can maintain military pressure indefinitely without the same urgency to reach settlement terms. Iran needed oil price chaos to force diplomatic intervention. That strategy requires keeping the strait effectively closed to commercial traffic. Every tanker that successfully transits with Allied naval escort undermines the leverage Iran desperately needs. And once the Charles de Gaulle battle group arrives with its accompanying French vessels, maintaining that closure becomes exponentially harder. The timeline matters immensely. Can Iran's fast boats and remaining drone capabilities inflict enough damage on commercial shipping before French reinforcements arrive? Can they create sufficient chaos to spike oil prices and trigger the diplomatic intervention they need? Or will Allied naval forces establish secure transit corridors before Iran's economic leverage materializes? America's response to Iran's Hormuz gambit demonstrated brutal clarity. Strike commercial vessels, lose warships in return. The exchange rate favored America overwhelmingly. Iran damaged ships. America eliminated entire vessel classes and destroyed critical infrastructure. But wars aren't always won through favorable exchange rates. Sometimes persistence and pain tolerance matter more than firepower advantages. Iran's regime bet everything on Hormuz leverage, forcing American concessions. The bet hasn't paid off yet, but the game isn't over. French ships are still sailing toward the Gulf. Commercial traffic remains suppressed. Oil prices stay elevated, though not catastrophically so. The strait exists in a contested gray zone where neither side achieved their objective completely. This uncertainty creates opportunity for miscalculation. Iran might escalate further, believing bolder strikes could tip the balance. America might expand targeting to include regime leadership directly, deciding that only decapitation will end the conflict. Allies might pull back if casualties mount, fragmenting the coalition when unity matters most. What's certain is that the Strait of Hormuz fight fundamentally changed the character of Operation Epic Fury. Early phases focused on dismantling Iran's military capability through overwhelming aerial bombardment. Now the challenge involves securing a maritime choke point against asymmetric threats while maintaining pressure on the mainland. Different skill sets, different assets, different risks. The outcome determines whether Iran's regime survives with any meaningful capability intact or collapses under sustained pressure from all directions simultaneously. And that outcome ripples across the entire region, affecting calculations in Moscow, decisions in European capitals, and the global economy's stability for years ahead. 21 miles wide, 6 miles of navigable shipping lanes, and the whole world watches what happens next. Iran's fast boats still prowl those 6 miles of water. French warships are sailing closer every day. Oil tankers wait in port, calculating risk versus profit. The Strait of Hormuz remains the world's most dangerous choke point, and this fight is far from finished. What happens in those narrow shipping lanes will determine not just Iran's fate, but the balance of power across an entire region.